With me is Mario Voigt, the State Premier of Thuringia. Mr. Voigt, you have experience of forming a coalition against the far-right Alternative for Germany. It became the strongest force in regional elections, and you then had to form a rather complicated three-way coalition to prevent the AfD from actually being in power in Thuringia. How is that working out?
Right now it's working fine. We are right in the start of it, and we are all aligned with our goals. We have a reform-driven process which basically takes the main issues of the voters as the driving factors, like education, like reforming the economical process in Thuringia, reducing red tape when it comes to bureaucracy. But now we have budget discussions coming up, and so we're going to see how this works out. But I'm rather optimistic that it's playing fine. But still, a three-party coalition is always more communication, more dialogue, and sometimes difficult. And that's why I'm working hard on the federal level that we can form a much easier coalition.
Here in Germany, we've seen a huge debate about the so-called firewall. That is the commitment by all parties of the centre not to work with the far-right AfD party. Your party leader, Friedrich Merz, accepted votes by the AfD for the very first time in German history to reach a majority in the German parliament. How is that impacting on how that firewall is being seen by your own people who want to have a more open conversation with the AfD?
Now, what the CDU wants is take issues away from the far right. And what you're going to see all around Europe is if the center-right and the centrist parties are not solving the issues of the voters, they will tend to vote rather extreme. You're going to find this in France, you're going to find this in the Netherlands and on different places else. And therefore, what we do as a CDU is try to position ourselves right in the middle of it, and inviting also Social Democrats and others to come along and solve the issues from the center, and not are relying on people from the extreme left or from the extreme right. And unfortunately, they didn't play along, and this was, in my opinion, a big strategic mistake of the Social Democrats and the Greens in the first place. But therefore, we're going to have the election on the 23rd of February in order to form a coalition who can solve these issues.
The AfD in Thuringia is led by Björn Höcke. He can legally be called a fascist. Parts of the party are being looked at very closely by German intelligence services. They're suspected of undermining democracy here in Germany. How acute is the danger when you look ahead to these elections that are less than 2 weeks away here in Germany?
I think the AfD is really a threat to democracy in Germany, and with Björn Höcke they have the most extremist leader in my home state. And there is a basic struggle going on between the Christian Democrats as a more centrist, center right-wing party, and on the other hand, the far extreme right with the AfD. And what we try to do is we try to invite all the other parties to solve the issues which are high on the radar of the people, which is migration, which is the economic situation of Germany, and which is also the competitiveness of our country. And if we are able to solve these issues, then I'm pretty certain that we will reduce the vote share of the AfD, and this is what we are looking for.
Well, how optimistic are you that it will be possible to find common ground on migration after we saw that spectacular failure to actually do exactly that in German Parliament ahead of the elections? Those very parties that were calling each other liars will potentially have to form a government again after Election Day.
I'm pretty optimistic that this will be possible after the election, but it also depends on the vote share for the Christian Democrats. That's why we are working hard in the next 2 weeks to increase our vote share, and then we will invite other parties to come along. And what I'm pretty optimistic, or makes me optimistic, is that the Social Democrats with their prime ministers in the States have already agreed on the policy initiatives the CDU have proposed, and therefore I believe that we have a good chance to tackle these issues right after the federal elections. And we have to, in order to make this a pretty dominant issue in German politics to be solved.
Now, one argument I've heard from your conservative CDU-CSU camp is that, look, the AfD polling at 20%, in your state it got more than 30%. Nobody is willing to go into a coalition with them, and that means people who are leaning right, potentially far right, effectively out of having their say in German politics because they have no chance of forming a government. But the flip side is, how successful has the AfD been in driving the agenda, for instance, on migration? After all, it was celebrating in German parliament when the conservative CDU agreed to team up with them and voted with them.
Quite frankly, I believe that they are not driving the agenda. The agenda is driven by what are the problems of the real voters out there and the people, how they perceive it. And in the last 3 years, there almost have been 2 million refugees coming to Germany, and this is an issue every local municipality is experiencing, and they sometimes have the impression that this is not high on the radar of the parties on the federal level. And what the CDU is trying to achieve is basically to say, well, we see you with your issues out there, and what we are experiencing right now in the German society is there are rather more, let's say, the somewhere voters who live more in rural areas, who have middle education, who are very closely tied to their social communities, socially more conservative people, and they feel neglected, they feel overseen from the people, the anywheres who can live in Berlin, in Munich, in Paris or London, and they are highly educated, they are have leadership positions in the society, and they try to impose their lifestyle and their worldview on these somewhere voters, and they are sending a stop sign. And what we as CDU try to achieve is basically bridging the gap between these two voting blocks. And if we are able to do so, to be more inclusive, then we also will reduce the extremism in the society.
So what you're describing there, that has a lot of parallels with what we're seeing in the United States. Donald Trump won because also there is a discrepancy between the big centers and rural communities. J.D. Vance, the now Vice President, even wrote a book about it. How far away is Germany from such a scenario? Many are already seeing 2029 as the key election that could determine which way Germany will go.
I think this is a very crucial question. I mean, first of all, we are a parliamentary system, so I believe German society is more consensual and we are more stable in a way. We are not driving and pushing so much around like the presidential politics in the US is done, and we are not so divided. But I think taking the bigger picture and seeing that 2029 is a crucial year, not just for federal election, also for the election in Eastern Germany, where Saxony and Thuringia will also have election. And this all taken together will decide if Germany in the next 4 years is able to solve the issues, reducing the disconnect, reducing the anger in the society, pushing the anger points away, or we are not able to solve that because we are moving too slow, we are not reform-driven enough, and then probably 2029 will be the watershed of it. And so from that all together, I believe it's crucial that everyone is understanding that it's not the nitty-gritty little things which have to change, the whole direction of the country has to change. And if we are able to deliver that, I'm certain that the AfD will be shrinking, and this is what we are aiming for.
Mario Voigt, State Premier of Thuringia, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the talk.